Mitchell never liked new beginnings. For 17 long years, she had grown comfortable in the rhythm of her marriage, in the quiet predictability of her suburban home, and in the order of her small but successful real estate office. But when her longtime secretary retired unexpectedly due to illness, Mitchell was forced to find a replacement. She told herself it would be easy, a formality really, just another face to type the contracts, manage the files, and take phone calls. Nothing more, nothing deeper. She couldn't have been more wrong. The girl arrived on a rain-drenched Monday morning. The storm had painted the sky in bruises of gray and black. The streets slick with rainwater that reflected the half-dead streetlights like pools of oil. Mitchell hadn't expected her to be early, but when she unlocked the office door, she found a young woman already waiting at the steps. She stood very still, umbrella clasped against her chest as if it were a shield, her dark hair plastered to her pale cheeks, her eyes cast downward. "You must be Laura," Mitchell said, shaking the rain off her own coat. The girl raised her head, and for the briefest moment, Mitchell's breath caught in her throat. Those eyes, they were sharp, familiar in a way that twisted something inside her chest. She told herself it was just the kind of resemblance you sometimes notice in strangers, an echo of someone you once knew, nothing more. But the way the girl stared back, unblinking, almost waiting for Mitchell to recognize her, made her throat tighten. "Yes," Laura finally replied, her voice soft, low, like it was being carried from far away. Mitchell unlocked the door, pushing aside the uneasy feeling. "Come in, let's get you settled." Inside, the office smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old paper. Mitchell had always kept things in perfect order, the way her late mother had raised her. Neatness was control, and control meant safety. But with Laura following silently behind her, Mitchell felt the walls close in, shadows stretching longer than they should. She tried to shake the thought. Laura moved with a strange grace, almost too quiet for someone her age. Her hands glided over the desk, over the typewriter, over the filing cabinet, as if she already knew them. Mitchell watched carefully. New employees usually stumbled through the first day, awkward and uncertain. Laura didn't. She settled into the desk like she had worked there all her life. "Have you done this kind of work before?" Mitchell asked, her voice forced casual. Laura's lips curved faintly. "Yes, a long time ago." The answer was odd, given Laura couldn't have been more than 26. Mitchell let it slide, focusing on paperwork, yet her thoughts kept drifting. The secretary's face stirred something buried, a memory clawing at the edge of her mind but refusing to surface. Her husband, David, had once looked at her with eyes that intense. Eyes that seemed to see through her, past her, into something she wasn't sure she wanted revealed. David, 17 years of marriage, a man whose laughter could fill a room, but whose silence could carve ice. He had been gone these past 3 months, business trips that stretched longer than usual, excuses about meetings in another city, another office. The distance between them had grown, but Mitchell told herself that was marriage. That was time. That was life. Now, as Laura sat at the desk, flipping open files like a woman possessed, Mitchell felt a sharp unease, as if David's absence had created a space Laura was meant to fill. But the thought was absurd. She shook it away. By afternoon, the storm outside deepened. Rain hammered the glass, and the fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly. Laura worked in silence, her typing rhythmic, mechanical, almost hypnotic. Mitchell retreated into her office, closing the door, needing space from the strange presence just beyond it. She reached for the framed photo on her desk, her wedding picture. David smiling in his black suit, his hand around her waist, eyes bright and alive. She stared at it for a long time, a heaviness settling in her chest. When she finally looked up, the office door was open. Laura stood in the doorway, watching. "You have a beautiful husband," Laura said softly, her voice carrying a strange tremor. Mitchell stiffened. "Excuse me." Laura stepped inside, her gaze fixed on the photo. "Your husband, David, he looks familiar." The words slithered through Mitchell's veins like ice. She placed the photo down, forcing a calmness she didn't feel. "You've never met him. How would you know him?" Laura didn't answer. She only smiled faintly, as though the answer lived in some secret place Mitchell wasn't allowed to touch. The storm raged on outside, but Mitchell barely heard it. Something in the way Laura spoke, slow, deliberate, with that unsettling familiarity, sent her mind spiraling back through 17 years of marriage. She thought of nights David returned home smelling of rain and cigarettes, his eyes carrying shadows he never explained. She thought of the moments he seemed almost a stranger in their own house, watching her from across the room with a silence too heavy to break. And now, this girl. Mitchell felt her throat tighten again. As the clock struck 6, Mitchell dismissed Laura, eager to send her away into the storm. "Be careful getting home," she said. Laura paused at the door. Her eyes lingered on Mitchell, then flicked briefly toward the photo of David once more. "I'll see you tomorrow," she whispered, and something in her tone made it sound less like a promise and more like a warning. The door closed. The office fell into silence. Mitchell sat alone in her chair, staring at the photo of her husband. The storm howled outside, but the sound that haunted her most was the echo of Laura's voice. David looked familiar to her, but how? And why, deep down, did Mitchell already fear the answer? The following morning, Mitchell told herself the unease of yesterday was only exhaustion. Storms always unsettled her. They reminded her of loss, of dark nights when her father never came home, of moments she wished buried. A new employee was always a disruption. Nothing more. She poured herself black coffee, swallowed the bitter taste, and prepared to meet Laura again with the kind of polite distance she'd cultivated for years in business. But when Laura arrived, it was as if the office had been waiting for her. The air shifted. The silence before she spoke stretched too long, and when she finally said, "Good morning, Mrs. Hale," the sound was soft, steady, and Mitchell froze. The cadence, the low timbre, the hushed weight of it was David's voice. Not perfectly, of course. No mimicry could be perfect, but it was close enough that Mitchell's chest constricted. She forced a smile, replying quickly, pretending not to notice, but her heart thudded like a fist inside her ribs. "You're early again," Mitchell said. Laura smiled, sitting down at her desk. "I like mornings. They're quieter, fewer distractions." Her words clung strangely to the air, as though they carried more than what she meant. Mitchell turned away, unwilling to drown in another silence heavy with questions. Throughout the day, Mitchell listened, against her will, to the way Laura spoke. Every phrase seemed haunted with an echo, a rhythm, a familiarity that clawed at the edges of her sanity. It was David when he whispered to her in the dark. David when he argued low and sharp. David when he said her name with an intimacy that made her both comforted and terrified. She tried to shake it, but the comparisons gnawed at her, growing more unbearable with every passing hour. Around noon, Mitchell caught Laura humming. It was faint, a melody half-formed, but Mitchell froze mid-step. That tune, she knew it. It was the lullaby David used to hum absent-mindedly at night, something he claimed his mother sang to him as a boy. She had never heard it anywhere else. Mitchell's throat dried. "What are you humming?" she asked sharply, almost too loudly. Laura blinked as though pulled from a trance. "Oh, I don't know. Just something in my head." Mitchell stared at her, searching for the lie in her expression. But Laura only lowered her gaze, fingers tapping absently against the desk, humming once more beneath her breath. Mitchell walked back into her office, slamming the door harder than she intended. Inside, the photograph of David stared at her again, smiling in stillness. Mitchell turned it face down. The hours dragged. Rain no longer fell outside, but Mitchell still felt the echo of storms in the air. Shadows lengthened across the office, stretching like claws over the floor. Laura worked silently, tireless, her head bent toward the typewriter as if the machine itself spoke to her. At 4 o'clock, the phone rang. Mitchell reached it first, answering out of habit. "Mrs. Hale?" The voice on the other end was low, distorted, muffled by static. "Do you know where your husband is tonight?" Mitchell's blood chilled. "Who is this?" The line crackled, silence stretching. Then the voice came again, lower still. "He's closer than you think." The phone went dead. Mitchell stared at the receiver, her breath shallow. She stepped out of her office, her eyes flicking immediately to Laura. The girl's hands were folded calmly on the desk, her eyes already on Mitchell, as if she had been waiting for her reaction. "You look pale," Laura said softly. "Was it bad news?" Mitchell's mouth was dry. She wanted to ask 100 questions. "Who are you? How do you know my husband? Why do you sound like him?" But the words caught in her throat. She forced a quick nod instead. "No, just a wrong number." But Laura smiled faintly, and Mitchell saw it then. It wasn't a smile of politeness, it was a smile of knowing. That night, Mitchell returned home to a house too empty. The rooms echoed with the absence of David, the silence heavier than ever. She made herself tea, sat in the living room, and tried to convince herself that Laura was just a coincidence, a stranger with familiar quirks. That was all. But then, as she drifted toward uneasy sleep, she heard it, a man's voice, low, humming that same lullaby. Her heart lurched as she bolted upright, scanning the room. The house was empty, but the sound lingered faintly, fading as if it had passed through her walls. Mitchell pressed her palms to her face, trembling. It wasn't possible. David was away, and yet, the next morning she confronted Laura directly. "Do you have brothers?" she asked, keeping her voice casual, though her insides screamed. Laura's eyes lifted slowly. Something dark flickered in them. "I had a brother," she whispered, "but he's gone now. He's been gone for years." Mitchell's chest tightened. "I'm sorry, what was his name?" Laura's lips parted. The pause stretched. Too long. Deliberate. "David." The room seemed to tilt beneath Mitchell. For a moment, she swore the wall shifted closer, the air pressing down on her lungs. She stared at the girl, words caught in her throat, but Laura's gaze never wavered. Calm, patient, as if she had been waiting years to deliver that name, waiting for Mitchell to finally ask. That night, Mitchell couldn't sleep. Her husband's absence weighed heavier than ever, his name repeating in her mind until it no longer felt like her husband's name at all, but something darker. She remembered the way he sometimes woke in the night, drenched in sweat, whispering apologies to no one she could see. The way he sometimes stood at the window for hours, silent, unmoving. She had once asked what haunted him, and he only said, "Things I left behind." Now Laura was here, her new secretary, the sister of a man with the same name, a man who was dead. Mitchell lay awake, listening to the house creak and groan, every sound sharper in the silence. And when her eyes finally closed, she dreamt of David's face. But in the dream, it wasn't her husband smiling back at her. It was Laura's brother, a dead man's smile, stitched into the features she loved most. And when she woke, the echo of his voice was still in her ears. The Hale residence had never been a place of fear. For 17 years, it stood as Mitchell's sanctuary, a quiet house at the edge of town, wrapped in hedges and guarded by tall oaks. Every photograph, every framed memory, every neat corner whispered of her life with David. But now the house felt foreign, unfamiliar, as if something had shifted in its bones while she was away at work. It began subtly, a creak in the hallway when she knew no one was there, the faint sound of footsteps overhead, though the bedroom above was empty. She tried to rationalize. Old houses settle, wood bends, air flows. But these excuses unraveled quickly. The noises weren't random. They were deliberate, timed, paced like footsteps following her. The first night it happened, she was in the kitchen washing dishes. The house was quiet except for the trickle of water, when suddenly she heard it, slow, heavy steps in the hallway. She turned, heart thundering, but the space was empty. Only shadows stretched across the floor. She stood frozen until the sound stopped, leaving her trembling in silence. When David was home, she used to call out for him in moments like that, laughing at herself for being startled. But he wasn't there, and the thought that someone else was filled her with dread. The second night, the whispers began. At first, she thought it was the wind, a faint rustling sound that rose and fell like words caught in leaves. But when she pressed her ear to the bedroom wall, she heard them clearer, low voices, muffled, arguing, then fading into soft laughter. Laughter that was terribly familiar. David's laughter. She tore herself away from the wall, clutching her chest. Her mind clawed for rational answers. Neighbors, television, imagination. Yet she knew it wasn't imagination. The laughter wasn't vague or uncertain. It was distinct, sharp, and carried with it the weight of memory. Mitchell didn't sleep that night. She sat upright in bed, every lamp burning, eyes darting toward the dark corners where shadows swelled and shifted like living things. By morning, she was pale and hollow-eyed, but she dressed neatly for work, determined to hide the unease. When she entered the office, Laura looked up instantly, her gaze too knowing. "You didn't sleep," Laura said softly. It wasn't a question. Mitchell froze. "How would you know that?" Laura's lips curved faintly. "Because I didn't either." The words twisted like a knife. Mitchell wanted to press, to demand answers, but she stopped herself. Instead, she retreated into her office, closing the door with trembling hands. She could feel Laura's eyes through the wood, like a shadow clinging to her every move. That evening, returning home felt like walking into the mouth of something waiting. The air inside was colder than outside, as though the house itself had exhaled all warmth. Mitchell wrapped herself in a sweater and moved room to room, switching on lights, searching for comfort that didn't come. In the living room, she paused. The wedding photo she had turned face down was upright again. David's smiling face stared back at her from the frame. Her breath caught. She hadn't touched it. No one had been in the house, yet there it was, standing tall, as though someone or something wanted it seen. Her hands shook as she placed it face down once more, whispering aloud, "No, not tonight. Please." The house seemed to respond. A faint knock echoed from the upstairs hallway, slow and steady. Mitchell's skin prickled. She didn't move, didn't breathe, listening as the knocking grew louder, closer. Then it stopped. Her phone rang, startling her. She snatched it up, desperate for human contact. But when she pressed it to her ear, her blood ran cold. "Mitchell," the voice whispered. David's voice. She couldn't speak. "Why did you let her in?" the voice asked, strained, angry. "She doesn't belong there. She brings him with her." The line went dead. Mitchell collapsed onto the couch, shaking violently. She clutched the phone to her chest, whispering, "David, was that you?" But only silence answered. That night, she wandered the house aimlessly, terrified of every sound. In the kitchen, she caught movement in the reflection of the window, a tall male figure standing behind her. She spun around, but the room was empty. When she finally forced herself upstairs, she found their bedroom colder than the rest of the house. The bedspread was disturbed, as though someone had sat upon it. At the foot of the bed lay something she hadn't seen in years, David's old wristwatch. It had broken 5 years ago. She remembered David tossing it into a drawer, frustrated with its stopped hands. Yet now it lay neatly on the blanket, ticking faintly. Mitchell's breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she picked it up. The watch hands moved, but not normally. They ticked backward. Her chest tightened. She stumbled backward, dropping the watch, watching it spin on the floor. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs refused. The house seemed alive now, breathing around her, whispering words she couldn't fully hear. When she finally lay down, exhaustion pulling her into uneasy sleep, the whispers grew louder. She dreamt of David's face again, but it wasn't hers he looked at. It was Laura's. He whispered something in the dream, words she couldn't make out. But when she woke, the phrase burned in her mind as if carved there. She's not his sister. She's his door. Mitchell sat in bed, her skin clammy with sweat, her eyes darting toward the dark corners of the room. The watch ticked faintly on the floor. The whispers hadn't stopped. Her house, her sanctuary, was no longer hers. It had become something else, something alive, something waiting. And deep down, Mitchell knew, whatever had entered her house, whatever Laura had brought with her, wasn't going to leave. Mitchell tried to convince herself she was unraveling. Stress, loneliness, paranoia, a mind haunted by coincidence and fear. That was easier to believe than the alternative, that her house had become a vessel for something neither living nor dead. But denial has a fragile spine. and the shadows in her life were sharpening their teeth. The fourth week of Laura's employment was when the truce began to uncoil. It was late evening at the office, the world outside drowning in the bruised colors of twilight. Mitchell had stayed behind, sorting files she didn't care about, simply to avoid the silence of her home. Laura remained too, unasked, her presence lingering like an echo Mitchell couldn't escape. The only sounds were the clack of the typewriter and the low hum Laura seemed to carry with her everywhere. That tune, that cursed lullaby. Finally, Mitchell snapped. "Where did you learn that song?" she demanded, stepping out of her office. Laura paused mid-keystroke. Her expression didn't flicker. "What song?" "The one you hum. The one David, my husband, sings sometimes." Laura tilted her head, her gaze unnervingly calm. "My brother used to hum it, every night before bed. It was the last thing I heard before he died." Mitchell's skin prickled. The room felt colder, the light dimmer. She wanted to press further, but something in Laura's tone warned her not to. Instead, she whispered, "How did he die?" Laura's fingers curled slowly against the typewriter keys. "He didn't just die," she said at last. "He was taken." The words sank into Mitchell like ice. She tried to respond, but Laura rose suddenly, smoothing her skirt, and walked out, leaving the office suffocatingly silent. Mitchell sat in the emptiness, her mind spiraling. Taken. Taken by what? By who? That night, Mitchell returned home to find the front door ajar. She froze on the threshold, heart pounding. She always locked it. Always. She stepped cautiously inside, her breath shallow. The house was silent, but wrong. Too still. On the dining table lay a photograph she had never seen before. Her wedding day, her in her white dress, David by her side. But in this photo, there was someone else, a young man standing just behind them, face blurred as if the camera had shaken. Her hand trembled as she lifted it closer. The figure's outline, his posture, eerily similar to Laura, or rather, a male version of her. Her mind screamed to reject it, but her gut knew. This was Laura's brother, and he had been there. At her wedding, the photograph slipped from her fingers, falling face down on the table. Mitchell stumbled backward, clutching the edge of a chair to keep herself upright. The air around her grew heavy, thick, humming faintly with whispers that seemed to crawl into her ears. He was here. He's always been here. That night, the house came alive again. Footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate, knocking on the walls, the watch ticking backward from the bedroom floor. And worse, her name whispered in the dark. "Mitchell." She sat upright in bed, clutching the sheets. "David," she whispered into the darkness. The air shifted. From the corner of the room, a figure emerged, tall, male, shadowed. For a fleeting second, she believed it was her husband, but as the figure stepped closer, she saw the face, pale, sunken, the eyes hollow pits, reflecting only emptiness. Laura's brother. Mitchell screamed, fumbling for the lamp. The light flicked on, flooding the room. The figure was gone. Her body shook uncontrollably, tears burning her eyes. She grabbed the phone, dialing David's number with trembling hands. The line rang, then clicked. But it wasn't David who answered, it was Laura. "Mrs. Hale," she whispered on the line. "Why are you calling my brother?" Mitchell dropped the phone as though it had burned her. It clattered against the floor, the dial tone droning into the silence. She pressed both hands against her ears, sobbing, whispering, "This isn't real. This isn't real." But it was. The following day, Mitchell couldn't bring herself to go to the office. She stayed home, curtains drawn, every mirror in the house covered with sheets. She couldn't bear to see reflections anymore. They no longer obeyed her. Last night, when she glanced at the bathroom mirror, her reflection had smiled, even though she hadn't. By late afternoon, exhaustion dragged her into restless sleep on the couch. She dreamed of Laura standing in the office, her eyes black and endless. Behind her stood David, expression blank, his arm draped not around Mitchell, but around Laura's shoulders. When Mitchell woke, someone was in the room with her. She felt it before she saw it, the air thick, heavy, humming with static. Slowly, she turned her head. On the coffee table sat David's wedding ring. Her stomach lurched. He never removed it, not once in 17 years. Yet here it was, lying cold and out of place in her home. Mitchell reached for it with trembling hands. As her fingers closed around the ring, a voice whispered right beside her ear, so close she felt the breath. "He gave it to me first." She spun around, but the room was empty. Only shadows, only silence. The days blurred after that. Work became unbearable. Laura's presence, her voice, her haunting resemblance to David in ways Mitchell couldn't ignore. At home, the whispers grew louder, more demanding. The house no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the shadows, to the dead. She began to piece together fragments of truth she didn't want. David had secrets. He had always carried shadows. He had always avoided talking about his childhood. And now, through Laura, those shadows had found their way back. Laura's brother wasn't just gone. He was here. And David, her husband of 17 years, wasn't just her husband. He was tied to something darker, something she had been too blind to see. The storm broke the night Mitchell finally saw him again. David stood in the doorway, drenched in rain, smiling the smile she once adored. For one fragile second, hope ignited inside her chest. She rushed forward, but when his arms wrapped around her, the embrace was wrong. Cold, hollow, lifeless. His chest held no heartbeat. His skin clung too tightly to the bones beneath. His eyes, once warm, were now endless voids. "You know now," he whispered, voice rattling like wind through a crypt. "I was never truly yours. I belonged to her, my sister. I was already gone when you married me." 17 years of love and devotion shattered in an instant. Mitchell staggered back, breath broken, realizing she had built her life with something that should not have walked among the living. The house responded violently. Walls shook, doors slammed, shadows stretched long and thin across the floor. The old watch on the mantel ticked backward, each click louder, crueler, as if time itself was collapsing. Laura appeared then, her face pale, her eyes wet with terror. "Let her go, David," she cried. "You're binding her. You're killing her." But David's form flickered. Man, corpse, specter, and his roar swallowed her voice. "No, she vowed herself to me, till death never parts us." The darkness surged. Mitchell screamed as the shadows swarmed, crushing warmth from her lungs. David's face was the last thing she saw. His smile widening, jaw unhinging, eyes burning black. Then silence. When the house calmed, only the watch remained on the floor, frozen at midnight. Weeks later, new owners moved in. They painted the walls, replaced the carpets, and laughed in the rooms. But at night, the whispers returned. A man's low murmur, a woman's broken scream, and those who glanced at the upstairs window swore they saw two figures, together, forever.